Good morning. Hi, everyone. Here we are at the end of 2024-2025 school year. Kind of shocking. Wait, sometimes when I'm signing my signature, they'll be like, and I'll be like 1994. It's like, what? Where? So this is our last art lecture for this school year. I also wonder, like, when will the art lectures end? They have gone on since about, I don't know when, 2010 or 9 or... So, and we have a very perfectly fitting, wonderful person to end this year with, Don Cerny, today. And I just want to thank all of the people. We've got another person in the room, Stephen Hendricks, who have been incredibly generous and thoughtful scholars, artists, and writers that have joined us in this series this year. Just beautiful gifts and offerings for us and for our archives. And I also want to make sure to thank Jocelyn Haldeman, who's been my TA for the series this year, really helpful. It's so nice to have a TA and be supported. So thank you. I'll be looking for one next year. And then I also want to thank Raoul Berman and Moema Oman, who are the people in media services that help do the recording. And then we have media interns that actually are working with us and support the tech and the recordings and then post them on YouTube. So really appreciate that labor. So today we have Olivia Dana, who will be introducing Dawn. So come up and tell us about her.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Olivia Dana. I'm currently a part of the Student-Originated Studies in Visual Arts program here at Evergreen, where I've been exploring themes of utility, value, creation, space, and identity through textiles and reconstruction. Today I feel very lucky to have the privilege to introduce to you Dawn Cerny, an artist, educator, and thinker whose vibrant and dynamic sculptural and 2D works touch on themes similar to those I see arising from the work of myself and my peers. Themes such as value, memory, space, ambivalence, time, the everyday, work, ambiguity, relationships, judgment, absurdity, and belonging. Working with easily found materials such as wood, cardboard, wire, yarn, clay, and ephemera, Cerny creates forms that bring into question quotidian human experience and the act of holding or being left with something. Wrapped in bold and striking colors, these creations play with representation and the abstract, evoking sensation and memory, demanding to be seen, and engaging our assumptions about functionality, perception, misinterpretation, and comfort. Cerny grew up in the Santa Ynez Valley of California and received a Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture from the Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts at Bard College in 2012. She's currently based in Seattle and teaches at Seattle University. Cerny is a two-time recipient of the Washington State Artist Fellowship, the 2020 Betty Bowen Award, and most recently received the Joan Mitchell Fellowship and the Bonnie Bronson Visual Arts Fellowship, both in 2022. Cerny's work has appeared in spaces all over North America. Most recently, the collection titled Port Marion is currently being exhibited at the Frye Museum. And it closes on June 22nd, so if you guys haven't been, you should go. In this exhibition, she plays with domestic space, interaction, and tensions between the artificial and reality. Her work has also appeared in the Seattle Art Museum, Portland Art Museum, Hawthorne Contemporary, the Mickey Meng Gallery, the Henry Cooper Contemporary, MoCA, and more. In talking about her solo exhibition, The Coconut Effect, shown at Hawthorne Contemporary last year, Cerny describes the process of thinking of the work interacting in its space, considering sightlines and structured placement to generate what she calls durational possibilities to disrupt the blank vacancy of the room in a way that still offers luxury of accessibility and movement. In the collaborations she creates between sculpture, drawings, and ephemera, we see how the forms interrupt and demand something new of each other through their ongoing relationship. One thread throughout her work is the concept of pieta. Of this, she says, "He is always on her lap. If the two of them are together, he is mostly hanging on her physically, or pulling on her, or draped over her, or leaning on her. She holds and never really ages." This speaks especially to her most recent body of sculptural work, entrusting the piece to hold, memory, value, and what is left behind, highlighting the intersections between furniture and mother. Entrusting and contingency, Cerny's work captures the absurd ambivalence of day-to-day life and reflects back to us the pleasure, confusion, and confounding nature of being human. With that, please join me in welcoming Dawn Cerny.
That was so beautiful that I'm like, oh, now I can just talk to you about my other problems. I'm like, oh, Olivia, it's so smart. What a smart artist, right? Like, who is that person? Which is what I was crying to my therapist yesterday when I was like, I have to do this talk tomorrow, and I want to be generous, and I want to be brave, and I want to be honest, but I don't know who I am. Remembering, of course, that is at the crux of my thesis, right? To seek understanding for myself, to seek understanding for others, and this craving of understanding as a way to kind of disarm power, right? Or disarm a kind of knowing, or disarm fear, and invite a kind of play, right? I have to tell myself that, like, invite the play, because I'm a Capricorn, so I'm not built that way. But I'm intelligent enough to know that, like, play and not knowing is how you innovate. It's how you make a future. And we're living at a time right now that's like, no. We want to know the fixed end in order to know, right, what our future should be. And so this idea, and I'm speaking to the choir at the Evergreen State College, right, is about undoing and asking questions. So I'm going to start first with a photo of my refrigerator, right? The best work. Because in it gives you all the kind of forensic evidence that you need to know about a person. Mainly that they're the kind of person that has like magnets and like put shit up on their refrigerator, right? In order to like know or remember or hold some sort of like, I don't know, aspiration for themselves. Up in the corner, like over that strange image, there's this note that says, "We presume goodwill." And this is a note for everyone in my family, that because we forget that we presume goodwill, but we need to remember that we presume goodwill. I think this comes from some 12-step something, but that the idea of moving through the world as though you're presuming goodwill, as opposed to like how I actually feel, which is that I need to protect myself and be defensive and like be the smartest, best, whatever. It's not helpful. So this idea of living with contemporary art also is this thing that I'm interested, right? Like, how do we live with contemporary art, especially when the freer that contemporary art has gotten, like the more expansive and politically inviting, philosophically rollicking it has become, the less it has a kind of threshold, the less it acts as a kind of threshold for understanding for most people, right? Contemporary art is seen as something that is like how I feel about fantasy football, right? Like, I think it's probably really fun. I don't know how it works. People get really excited about it. And contemporary art is kind of in that same like league. It's for the heads. It's for the people that know. And yet, of course, the hope, I don't know for fantasy football, but at least for contemporary art, is that it does what art does, which is like invites us in to that understanding and that knowing, and hopefully be brave and figure out how we can like orient ourselves with the things that we know and we don't know. All right, so let's get started. Part one, form and materials. This idea of the sensation of the real. Part two, place and contingency, the work inside of the work. And then three is this, it's all encounter. This is all just like a word salad, right? But like the idea of like the encounter and different ways that I think about how a work can be encountered. All right, so number one, somebody asked me, what is a singular image that means something to you? and the shame that fell over me, right? Has anybody, you've ever met somebody and they're like, what's your favorite movie? And you're like, I can't think of one movie, right? I know that I care about movies. I know I care about images. But when it came to a singular image that meant something to me, it took me a while. And it was interesting, this kind of idea of figuring out how to use my body and sensation in order to think about what that image was. And what I came up with was the pietà. And then I was like so embarrassed, right? Like, oh, it's so weird. This is so weird. And I'm like a sophisticated person. And I'm like, I'm not Catholic, right? I'm a religious person, but this seems, I don't understand what this thing is. And yet, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, oh, it's a rigid and a slump, right? There's a rigid and a slump. At the same time that someone was asking me about a single image that meant something to me, I was also in my first year of this master's program for sculpture at Bard College, having never really made sculpture before. So I was also really trying to understand, like, what is a sculpture? And everyone kept saying, like, it can be anything, it could be anything. Because I'm a Capricorn, I really need structure, right? And slowly people could start explaining to me this idea of sculpture. And for me, what I realized, like why I had come to it unconsciously, is because it was real. Because it was both real and a fiction. It had a front, and it had a back, and it had sides, and it had an underneath. And this encounter with the sculpture didn't have a fixed answer, right? My body, my eyes, my height, my abilities were going to dictate a really singular experience with this thing. Like what I know from this height versus this height, right, is going to change. So sculpture for me kind of invites this idea of like an encounter that kind of courts a ludic way of knowing. And ludic, right, is like playful, spontaneous. There's a kind of game that's being played. All right, moving on. So the forms and materials. So when I think about form, we're going to talk about form in a second, but the materials and form is also this idea of like the act or action, like a kind of quickness that I'm very interested in. As you can tell from my refrigerator, I'm very interested in this idea of like the forensic, the anthropological, the sociological, the psychological, right? Like all these different points of entering and kind of figuring something out. And I'm also really interested in this idea of like the quick, the low, the witty, and a kind of broadly relatable. So here, again, similar to my refrigerator, is a collection of things that were in my purse that I believe are like sculptural forms and materials that I'm very interested in. And I also wanted to share this thing that I can't stop talking about, which is the first representation of the crucifixion that we know historically, or know, right? Who knows? But was founded in the slaves' quarters in Palatine Hill in Rome, and it was basically just like mocking one of the fellow slaves, saying like, this is who blah, blah, blah worships with the head of an ass, right? And the idea to me that something, the crucifixion, which has been made like the highest, form of art during a certain period, or this depiction is like so meaningful, that the first thing is a piece of graffiti that's just like someone negging another person. And the pleasure that I find in this idea of the agency that people have to destroy other property, to use cartooning and graffiti to create agency wherever they are at, and humor as a kind of power, although this may be kind of bullying too, is exciting to me. It's like a kind of doorway to a kind of liberation. All right. I'm like always, my mouth dries up as I'm being really honest, because that's funny, isn't it? I'm like, I'm so honest. Please don't judge me, but of course, you're here to judge. So the other idea of form, right, really has to do with the body or the physical for me. So I talk a lot about like collecting the moves, the sculptural moves that I make from a taxonomy of home. So that taxonomy is really made up of like the actions that I see physically people make in our home, but it also has to do the kind of gestural moves of like things too, right? Like this, right? I don't know, if I had change, I would throw it around. So like something quick, absent-minded, right? Those kinds of moves, but also like the kind of like physical moves that we understand, right? Like, oh, I'm like really, like this is how I maybe feel right now, but this is how I'm going to present myself. And this idea of the absurdity of those motions and the relatability of them, and also that the body can mimic objects and objects can mimic the body. I mean, we're always seeing like houses with faces or like cars with faces, but this idea of moving between object and figure is really, really exciting for me because it has this like wealth of like poetic possibilities to code things and make things relatable to people, but also to like confuse and confound as well. All right, so what do I actually do? What do I actually make, and how do I do it? So I start usually from drawing. Drawing is like the most liberating. There's no gravity. I don't have to think about money. I get to take the sensations of the everyday and try to be like, what would I be if I was a form, right? I discovered this in my family, like it's like with my kid, I'm like, draw a closed shape that shows how pissed you are at me, and then he'll like draw something, and I'll be like, whoa, I didn't know it was that bad, right? Because form is this way that moves past language. Color moves past language, like all these things, right, hit us in a different place. So from there, I'm like, ooh, that feels really real. That feels really true to me. Who do you become in 3 dimensions? And then I take the sensations of that drawing, and then I forget about it. I put it in my body, and then I use like very quick materials like cardboard, wood, glue gun, plaster tape to create these kind of maquettes. So here's another example, right? This is not just one person, it's 2, right? This idea of like the 2. In the drawing, it's like one figure that's kind of kneeling, kind of this other smaller figure that's like up against it. And it's not, like their relationship is not, is it interdependent? What is going on? Because like the color is telling me one thing and the scale is telling me another thing. And then I then forget that drawing and then move to the actual sculpture where that lump then becomes this like ceramic high heel that's barely even seen, that this tall thing is actually sitting on, right? So it's just a way, almost in a literary sense, right, of taking these characters and changing through scale, material, color, right, and finding new things out, coming into a new kind of understanding with them. So based on these kind of weird drawings, these drawings with my body and, and photo that I did of like mothers as furniture, I then did those kind of physical exercises and then thought about, right, that line, shape, scale within these small drawings, did them, and forgot about them. It's actually maybe like a little bit like, I need to take more acting classes, but I think it has something to do with like some school of acting, right, where you're like embodying something and then just being in the moment when you're making it. You can see it's really quick, like foam, cardboard, tape, very fast materials. And I'm constantly, as I'm working, I'm constantly going like, who are you? What are you really doing? Is this tape, is this bend doing something? Is the surface of something? and I'm moving around constantly, right, and looking at all angles to make sure that this thing is doing something, even if it's doing it really badly, which is really the best, right? When you get something that's like a, oh no, and then something that's like really confident. I like that in people, and I like that in sculptures. Okay, so the materials, Vaginal Davis coined this term availabilism, where you're using materials that are available to you. I heard that in a talk once, and I've never found any proof of that, but I loved the statement so much that I'm just going to keep on spreading this idea of availabilism. So these are the materials that are like, you find in a junk drawer, right? And that for whatever reason you keep, because maybe they have a beautiful color or a beautiful shape, or they're just like really strange and interesting to you, or you know that they're going to have a potential use for something else, but you don't know what. I'm sure there's some, this comes out of some, I don't know, Depression era thinking on my part that like you should never throw anything away, you should always keep it, it has some sort of potential value. But the idea of like taking these things and then outplaying their actual value is something quite incredible that art can do. That I can take a pencil and a piece of paper and transform it and like make someone cry or make them think about it in their own subconscious. That's an incredible power to have. So I'm thinking about the ways that I can use my intellect, my philosophical point of view, the pleasure and the play of like looking and thinking really rigorously about things to change and manipulate the way that these materials are read. And there are these like Boucherette Moroccan rugs, right, that have, they make them for tourists and it's all very charming, but you can't deny that these rugs made out of like recycled material have a kind of rigor or thinking in them that really outplays a lot of contemporary painting in my mind. And then the fact that they are on the floor, that you walk on them, has like a pretty profound notion of humility that's quite powerful to me. That they hold, that they hold you, that you are above them, and that you can experience something just visually looking down at something where you're above and it's down, and that's very different than looking at something up on a wall that's above you. All right, so part 2, place and contingency. So this idea of like place and the conditions within the place, and contingency meaning like the conditions that you cannot control within that place that then shapes the way that you're making work or thinking about work. So in this case, we're going to start with the first image that made me, I had the Pietà, and then I had this Walker Evans photograph of the table fireplace picture on a wall right in this bedroom. So this image was the first thing that I saw that made me realize that a work of art did not have to stand still, that a work of art could also be the record of what was happening at that time, and that everyday life, right, recorded the evidence of those who were there. And that portrait for me was the most exciting because it felt like the most true. It also, because of its ephemerality, meant that it wasn't gonna stay. A photograph, of course, could kind of document it and freeze it and make this kind of fiction about it. But this idea of the act of like arranging things, or accidents happening, or things getting knocked off, or the ambient conditions of a place like light, seasons, changing a sculptural piece of work that was just like a performance for the viewer. And that also all the artifacts on it could be moved around and changed as well. That art did not have to be a big piece of marble that could only stay in one place in a very wealthy person's home. That there was a migratory potential to objects and their relationship to each other for the person that was doing the arranging, and also for the person who was looking at the evidence of that which was arranged. So this brings up this idea of taste, which is very interesting to me, how taste is cultivated, what is good taste, what is bad taste. And ultimately, the thing that I'm most interested in is that the power of love, the kind of transformative nature of I love this thing, and I believe in this thing, and this thing is beautiful to me, like art, can kind of cast this spell where I too believe that it is beautiful, that I too believe that it is sophisticated and thoughtful and interesting, even though there's another side of me that's that's a wild thing to put on your washing machine, right? That's bonkers. But the idea and the pleasure of it, for me, the joy of it is, and the kind of someone thought of that is exquisite. It's the most exciting thing. That intention can intention can kind of confound my own notions of what taste is and what is good and what is bad. Because there is what is interesting, right? Which is maybe neither good nor bad. Okay, so I'm going to talk the Barnes Foundation, right? So place, right? The contingency, the work within the work is okay, the verbs of this, right, are chance, improvisation, catastrophe, misunderstanding, habit, ritual, and I brought up the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia just because it, in my mind, it's one of the greatest museums. It was in a domestic setting. It had kind of a way of displaying both decorative artifacts, souvenirs, furniture, useful objects, utilitarian objects with a Cezanne, right? So there's something that is about the evidence of the pleasure of putting things in relation to each other that then we get to kind of marvel at and be anything is possible. But for me, for myself at least, this idea of anything is possible has to be in such a small economy because I don't have a lot of money. And at least when I was first making this work in 2014, I was really having to invent a way of thinking really expansively, about how I could use the restraints in the economy of the home, of the domestic, and really think super rigorously about it and also have fun. I was a new mother at the time, right? You have a kid and then you're wait, how I didn't have time before, I didn't have money before, and now I have even less time and money, and I don't even have my body anymore, and this thing needs me, and I love it. What? So I was thinking a lot about these kind of migratory arrangements of things and invented the napkin holder. So these holders became the dumbest philosophical experiment. But all dumb things, they're actually quite helpful. So it was essentially just a holder that as time progressed, I would shove things into it, and it became a kind of odd museum, right? So it became a museum of the things that were going on. Over time, I would take photographs of it, of the front and the back, and then I made these strange collages. I think these are amazing, and not just because they were inexpensive and they didn't take much time, it's because I was using the conditions of having no time and no money to invent a new way out philosophically for myself and use my exhaustion and my absent-mindedness as the subject of the work, right? As something that was like, I was saying was worthwhile and kind of interesting to me. So at this time too, I was thinking about, right, the ways that furniture itself, well, first I was thinking about like, why do people have this like experience at IKEA of like really knowing who they are aesthetically in a way that they don't when they're in a museum, right? Or they're in a gallery. Like they know that they're like the weird yellow clock person, which is a kind of bold, interesting move in their home, but they don't know what painting they should buy. So I was thinking about this idea of furniture as being this kind of like most clearly in service and useful thing that people understand, like they understand their relationship to it, and they also understand what they like and what they don't like aesthetically about it. So I started thinking about, like from that napkin holder or letter holder, right? I started thinking about this idea of like a shelf that things could be, that could kind of hold or display, but also be like really misunderstood and like kind of bewildering. I liked this little like standard height for things thing. I don't know. You know, mainly just because it's beautiful, but also it's kind of interesting to think that there are standard heights for things. So this is an example of, right, kind of an exhibition that was kind of courting kind of contingent thinking. Myself, Amanda Donnan, and Rob Ree, all like tired and underpaid or unemployed at the time, decided to do this exhibition of like a lending library. So the idea was that students at Seattle U could come to this exhibition and they could check out a work of art that they could live with for 2 weeks, and then they could document it. So that large sculpture was actually borrowed by someone in the registrar's office, and like it's on casters, so they had to push it from the gallery right into their office, and then they took this like really incredible photo of it. That's not that incredible, but it's pretty funny. So the idea of this exhibition was that like as the show was actually leaving, like there would just be like emptiness on the walls, and then you would just like come to see what was there that you could potentially like take with you as a way of kind of offering people a way to think about what they wanted and then how they lived with it in their dorm room or whatever. We also gave them little like hanging kits. So here is a good example. So we're going from like how we live with things to the making of it. So in like, there's my child, my paid assistant. He got paid in popsicles and snacks and all the Criterion channel that he could possibly watch. We still joke about how I would let him watch Seven Samurai twice in a day because it got me 6 hours of work. And he had to read. So this was a COVID residency that I did. I was very excited to finally have a residency after like always working within the conditions of my home. Finally, I was going to have space and I wasn't going to be interrupted all the time. But then COVID happened, so I realized that actually this was just going to be like a bigger, more square footage version of my home, and I was going to be interrupted even more. So the resistance and resentment that I have against this is like very real at first because like I'm a professional artist and I really want to make the things that I haven't been able to make. And during this time I realized, who cares, right? Like actually there's something way more interesting and like fascinating about interruption and about a negotiation of like who's like people's needs and wants and and then thinking about that in real time with my kid in this space, and then thinking about how do the objects do that? How can a sculpture do that? How can I make it like dangle and be annoying and kind of fragile and like willful, right? Or like, I don't know. So you'll see these, at first I taped Graham. I made these tape lines around the floor to tell Graham where they could not go. And over time, Graham stole my tape and started taping their own lines on the floor, which then I would get angry about because the work that he was making, and by work I just mean play, was more interesting than the things that I was making. So now I was in a competition, right? But also I was like, I couldn't be like more giddy, because that through watching him and then watching him, I was finding out more things about like what could be at stake within an object. And like, this is so fun, and this is not fun, right? This is like mature, professional, please give me money for your fellowship, right? Like, but there are slyer, slower ways of performing some of these ideas of like a transgression of correctness and a kind of playfulness. Even though, like, I'm a Pee-wee's Playhouse fan. Like, of course, this is superior to me. So from here, then I get cancer. I get breast cancer during COVID, which is like the worst idea ever. I don't know what I was thinking. And from working from a really big scale, I had to like really listen to the limitations of my body and start working small. So drawing was very important. So let's see, because it's what my body could do. I started thinking a lot about this relationship between like the drawing and the sculpture, and if there was a way to start having the drawing talk about the sculpture and the sculpture talk about the drawing. I don't know. Cancer is very hard, you guys. So I then started making these like gestural objects. It's not like assemblage, but it's like a kind of, like I would make a drawing of what the sculpture should be like, and then start modifying or riffing or being kind of improvisational about what felt right, what felt true. So here's a few examples of the kind of iterations. And actually, this is a great example of like, damn it, like I actually think that that purple version is better than what the final version is. But I only have this photo, and I have to trust like my reasonings for, moving on. So here's another one. So again, thinking about that Walker Evans photo of like the mantelpiece where I'm just like moving, I'm trying to find something that feels like fast and also like, I don't know, like rigorous. But the thrill of this is that they could change and change and change and change and change, right? It doesn't have to be one way. And then there's also the pleasure of like knowing what they do in terms of like shifting their scale or how they're presented, because that is another way, right, of like figuring these things out. So thinking about that contingency as well, kind of, or those ambient conditions shaping or putting pressure as I'm making. This is my backyard where I work, only when it's sunny. So if I'm doing things that are really big, I really have to watch the weather. And then this is a picture of my basement studio. So making this like sculpture that is going to be at the Fry. So you can also see like, I'm working amongst like Christmas decorations and other things. So this motion from here where you're seeing work and it kind of gets lost, which is kind of interesting, versus this kind of like more like theatrical kind of like look at this really important thing, right, when it's in a museum space. This is that Fry show at Port Marion. But the thing that's pleasurable to me, right, from here to here, is that you can better see those moves, the dangle, the hook, the swing, the pinch, the twist, right, the shove. All of that language is much clearer when you take all of my everyday stuff away. Here's another example, like how it started. And then when I needed to take photos of it for the show, I had to move a bunch of furniture around in my bedroom in order to like see how this thing actually looked, that then went in a museum. Okay, so the encounter, how are we doing for time? How much time do I have? 17 minutes? Okay. I'm all right. I know I talk fast. Okay, so this idea of like encounter, like how you encounter work, is very interesting to me because of course the museum is like, that makes it really easy to think, right? But it's not as interesting to me as how a work reveals itself or talks to you, or gets blocked by a bunch of laundry, and then reveals itself when you clean your house, when you're living with it. Like, it's the most exciting thing to live with it and to watch it through the seasons change. So this was an Airbnb project that I did with Rob Ree. The Airbnb project was mainly Rob Ree and I trying to figure out how we could use the resources that we had to make exhibitions that created different encounters with work. So my part of this was an Airbnb that was advertised that you could never rent. So it was only like a show that you could see photographed. None of the titles were here, but you're just like looking at the nobody's looking at the show to like look at the show. What they're looking at the work for is like the vibe of the house, right? So this is a kind of like sneaky way, and I did a zine with it too, where I'm like showing people in my house like, oh, do you want to live here? But actually I'm just showing the work of my friends, right? As decoration. But then I got to live with this work for 2 months and then mailed everything home. Right? So here, and I wanted to share this with you just because it's such a liberating idea to think about like what exhibition could be. The other project I didn't show because I couldn't find the slides that Rob Ree did was an Airbnb that you could actually stay at that was like an immersive, like, I don't know, art experience where there was like tons of sculptures that we made. We had a friend that made very specific plates for the Airbnb, and essentially Rob had to manage this Airbnb for like 2 months, which was like very exhausting, but super satisfying. So to think about exhibition and how you invite encounter with work in all different kinds of ways. And then I'm going to finish up with this this juggernaut of this project that I'm doing with Right Editions, and it's this modular tabletop sculpture. I had this brilliant idea that what everybody needed was a kind of Mr. Potato Head of like a sculpture so that people could understand this idea of like motion and choice as a kind of play. And so I made, it's a unique edition. There's 32 of these. It comes in a box with this like, this like manual and these hooks, and you can arrange it in all these kind of ways. But then I thought, oh, what we should do is we should gift these to 10 different people so they could live with them and document it, and then we're going to make a book about it. And this has now spiraled into this like more insane project that I don't know, I have to take it's like that kind of friend where you're like, you're really great, but I only so much because you like take a lot from me. I get a lot too, but also yikes. But I invented it, so I am the friend, right? So it started off first like, okay, I knew that I wanted to have this like glass egg cup blown, and I knew that I wanted it to have glass, and then I was just thinking about all these different forms. And then here is an example of like one of the holdies arrangements, because they could, of course, put their own stuff in it and then move it where they wanted. So this idea of like, again, the difference between like when you're living with it to when it's like in the photo studio. And then here are a couple different photos from the giftees. My friend Andrew and Melinda took it on a trip. Pam Dick was an incredible writer and poet, did these very like tasteful, different arrangements. And then Michael Brenson, I think I set it up for him and he just left it, right? And he did nothing to interact with it, which is great too. So here's Andrew and Melinda's daughter, Zazie. They took it to the beach. And then here is its formal portrait. So its last iteration, it looked exactly like this on their counter. And then I had to take photos of it and then recreate it in the studio, like how it actually lived. And the thing I love about it is you can barely even see it, right? It becomes this kind of way station or shrine. So unbelievably, no one wanted to buy these, so I had to make some infomercials, which you can look up online, to try to explain like why these were so great, but they ended up being their own like hilarious and very niche art pieces, right? I think that I'm being like so generous, and it's like, no, we still don't understand what you're talking about. Post-structuralist infomercial on these tabletop sculptures that no one wants. You can see there's the box that I silk screened too, so they come in their own kit. So good. And then like, come on, somebody please buy these. So I, right, Editions and I borrowed Mickey Mang's gallery in San Francisco, and I put on this exhibition that like was like we're not even trying to pretend like we're being tasteful, right? We're just selling these things, and no one bought them. But the pleasure of this exhibition was that at night, because it's in Chinatown in San Francisco, I had this timer set on. It's not a residential area, but people still walk through there. So I had a timer set on, so at 7 o'clock every evening, this disco light would go on in the store. And so people really loved this show in the neighborhood, because they don't really, people that live, there's like social services, organizations next door, a lot of kids going around. No one really thinks about art. But this show engendered itself, right, as part of the community, as something that was like inviting. And also we had candy that we were giving out to kids. And this is, the reason this is actually so bold is because I knew that the gallery was only going to be open 2 days a week. So I wanted to make sure that the graphics were like loud enough to like go through that kind of grate that came down. And there's a little QR code that people can like get to the advertisements about. Oh, just like such fun, right? Such a joy. And also like nobody asked for this. Isn't that great to know that you can do something that no one asked for, and as long as you're like working within your budget and basically within your like resources, that you can do something that invites community and pleasure and thinking in an interesting way. What a way to fight fascism, right? Joy. I know we're being told this, like, we gotta rest, we gotta relax. Is this great as me? Like, let's go here, right? Like, we gotta rest, we gotta relax. But the idea of gifts and hospitality and guilelessness, right? These are incredibly valuable tools, not just for big S surviving, but also small S surviving, just with each other. and for ourselves as well. It's a really powerful act. And this is what I tell myself as I go back to my studio and I look at like the remaining like sculptures, right? And I'm like, no one wants these, but I do. I think they're great. With that, now we're going to end and open for questions.
You talked a lot about like potential and like hoarding as potential value and creating something that like outplays something's actual value.
Yeah.
And you also talked about migratory potential of objects and their relationship to one another.
Yeah.
And I guess I was just wondering a little bit more about what your framework is for determining value.
Yeah.
That's kind of a hard question.
No, that's a great question. Which then, but I can leave. It's so unsophisticated, right? It's like, oh, I belong to you, right? Or the instinct. It's so immature, right? It's so childish. And there's a great short story Virginia Woolf wrote called Solid Objects about this man who became he's like this professional, and he started realizing that some rocks were better than others and or a chipped piece of china was better than others, and he just collect it, right? So that idea of value being subjective and instinctual, but because I think about it a lot, I'm like, oh, you have to have some charm, or you have to be kind of pathetic, or you have to have a really good shape. And it's a shape that relates to a sensation that I have, that I relate to, right? So there's a kind of I'm like, is it narcissism? Maybe, but it's also the idea of not being alone, right? And looking for myself, or something I relate to, or some kind of kinship that I have to a thing. But sometimes it can just be far weirder than that. I collect toilet paper rolls from museum bathrooms, right? So it's there's a Dia Beacon toilet paper roll. It's super weird. But you understand. Or oh, here's a paper towel that I took from the Noguchi Museum, right? So that there's a way of also the thing imbuing itself by proximity, but also just being a disposable thing. So that mythology too. Yeah. That was a pretty good answer.
Hi, Dawn.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us. I think Wyatt, I want to kind of continue with Wyatt's question about your framework for determining value. I was thinking about your IKEA anecdote and your question, why is it that people can recognize themselves in the commodity form at IKEA in a way that they can't with art? And I'm thinking about, well, in part because the objects in IKEA are there for purchase.
Yep.
And there's a recognition this is for me because it's a commodity.
Yeah.
And although... And maybe it's affordable or something. Right?
Yes, it's like a price point invitation, right, to aesthetics.
And with the capture of art by capital as investment, there's this kind of notion that value literally is whatever's most expensive is what's most valuable. And then at the other end of the continuum, you have the Walker Evans photo, which you described as Wyatt put it. You talked about that migratory aspect of art so beautifully. An arrangement, the kind of subjective human life of everyone's sensibility in their own domestic space, contrasting, as you put it, with the large piece of marble in the wealthy collector's home. And so these are contrasts between art as capital and art as you put it, as what's interesting for us, and what's relational. So there's also then the issue then of how the commodity form is kind of living in the psyche, or how the psyche is structured by the commodity form. And your work very much seems to be like plaintively in some ways resisting this, art as commodity, while, and the ambivalence at the heart of your work seems to be around that while operating within capitalist economics. And then I just want to kind of touch on the mom as furniture in relation to that, the references where the objectification of the body as furniture and furniture as commodity through unpaid emotional labor, domestic work. So there's a kind of latent or maybe explicit historical materialism in what you're doing, right? There's domestic life as a site of production, unpaid labor, and so forth. Yeah.
I know. And if I talked about that, it wouldn't be fun, right? So like, there's this way of like using like charm or inventiveness, but that is at the stake of everything, right? In my mind, it's like we relegate the domestic, right? Because it has a kind of, it has like, at a certain point I was like, it's like, it's mothers. I'm interested in mothers. And I'm like, because they're like monstrous, and yet we expect so much from them, and this kind of care that's like totally not helped. They are flying blind at this time, right? And for a while, this is like, I don't know, post-Enlightenment crisis, right? Like, if we cut the umbilical cord to God, if we cut the umbilical cord to the pagan, like, now we're gods, right? Now we're alone. And so now mother, right, is now carrying a kind of like labor of love, right? Which is worthless, which has no value. And yet we also know that it has an absolute value, right? That the social has a value, and at this point I was like, okay, well, this mother idea makes me really uncomfortable in a few different ways. And so then I was like, it's caretaking, right? Which felt broader, but we're going to still say mother because like there's all kinds of way to mother, right? Like the idea, the like noble idea of mother is like super potent and powerful as the ideal, but then there's the reality, right? Which is why I go to therapy, because like there's never enough mother, and especially as a kid that was like born to mother her own mother, right? There's this other fucked up thing that happens. Now that's recorded, but I know that she won't watch this. There's another conversation. But so we're looking at these economies of like almost like spiritual behavioral caretaking economies, and then there's like what is then projected upon it in both idealized and really dismissed ways, right? Like teaching isn't real work, right? Being a CEO is worth giving a lot of money. All these things that we know. And yet this other thing that I know, which is that within the economy of the home, like when you don't have money, there's all these, I mean, this is like, you know, what do I want to say? It could be romanticizing, but it's also just about the pragmatics of survival, which is that like you have to make a way out of no way sometimes. And this is something that never gets the kind of intellectual love and caretaking academically that it deserves. And people attempt it, and then it just gets weird. There's like something that just gets weird. And sometimes I think that there's a kind of, there's a way that people are intellectuals, right, have this very uncomfortable or awkward way of grappling with the spiritual, right, or the metaphysical. It just gets weird because people don't want to be uncomfortable and they don't want to like not know or something. And then and then it just gets really lonely, right? And we know that, I don't know, what am I trying to say? yeah, there's just a way that I want a bigger archetype for what a caretaker can be and like what is valued about caretaking. But there's a very easy answer to be like, make it big in bronze, right? And I'm like, no, I actually think that the like impermanence or precariousness is the value. Like how you problem solve out of that is the value. But let me tell you, everyone, like this is something that I, like as somebody who's like older now and still, I'm like, oh, some permanence would be really nice, right? Like a common understanding of what is valuable about the work that I do would be great. But unfortunately, it can only be done with my brain and my words. And sometimes I don't feel that smart, right? Like I don't feel smart enough intellectually to like make the argument about what I think is valuable and why I think it's valuable. I just awkwardly stumble over here or with friends. But yeah, to work inside the economy of the home and outside of the economy of a market, which I have no, I'm interested in conceptually, but I do not believe it is real, right? I do not understand it and I don't think it's real. But the consequences of it are real. And grappling with the consequences of that reality, I am interested in. Does that? Yeah, okay. Thanks for saying amazing. I really appreciate that. You're willing to like, yes. I had a feeling. This is a good place to talk.
I have two on
Oh, yeah,
Zoom,
yeah.
and then I've got three in the room. Let's see if we can get to them. So two on Zoom. One is, and I think they actually work together.
Okay.
One is from Hugo Flores, who says about how accident plays in your work, and the other is Daniel Conway, who asks, what would you say to someone who has lost faith in their own artistic expression? I think they kind of go together.
Like first about accident. Accident invites you into your expectations, and then you get to think about what your expectations are and why, and then maybe you get to Aikido them, right? Look, humility is a choice and a strength, right? Sometimes our will can be more about protecting us because we don't want to work, right? And what catastrophe does is that it invites us into consenting to a deeper work. But we do get to be sad. We get to be really sad and disappointed and disheartened and like in a state of crisis, right? We get that because it's important. It's important to want something and then not get it. And then it's important to learn how to orient yourself in the reality of that not having. And this is, like you love something. That's why it hurts when it fails, right? And to become invested more in expanding that love and like really holding that love and that desire for something in the center of how you repair, how you recover, how you make a new expectation is pretty radical. And this is where like the play is so important, right? Because in play, there's a way of being a little detached, right? Improvisation too is that way where it's like, I don't care. Sometimes it's like I can just pretend like I don't care and I do kind of care. But mastering that ability to lose, mastering the ability to kind of fail and have catastrophe happen is consenting to life, right? There's this term acedia, which is related to sloth. And there was this philosopher who, I cannot remember who it was, but they talk about acedia is not consenting to what is, not consenting to living, right? And I feel those days too. I'm a big Bravo fan, so I'm like, this is like, I do not consent to live. And then that is very important to life too, but loss and failure and that frustration is also moving through that and finding what is more deeply inside of you about that catastrophe is everything. But you do need some time to just be like, oh, I'm so sad. That didn't go where I wanted, and now I have to work even harder. So the second question was about like losing that. That is the same thing, right? Where you think you know who you are, but having the humility to be like, maybe I don't, and continually be like not allowing the first answer to be the one that defines you, and to be suspicious of yourself in a playful way, right? And I think that sense of freedom, right? What is freedom? Like, freedom is becoming familiar with the terrain of your own like resistance, and then figuring out how to turn it upside down so that you can, so that remembering that you're free, and to take what you have, to turn it upside down, to like know it differently and know it more deeply. But that sense, which I so identify with, of like feeling as though you have lost the trail, usually means that you're on exactly the right trail. I have more suspicion with myself when I know what I'm doing. And I'm sure like Jung probably said something about this, but like that is the thing that I would be more wary of. But also I'm like, damn it, like, does that mean I'm supposed to be just like uncomfortable all the time as the way in which to like know and love more deeply? And I think this is why like the spiritual side I've been thinking about so much more, is like nurturing this relationship with an unknown, and nurturing a relationship with like a kind of caretaking for myself that's like deeper and a little bit more uncomfortable, especially as a Protestant Capricorn, right? Like that I'm like, oh, that sense of loss of what I'm doing is a loss or a kind of confounded nature of who I'm being. If that doesn't make any sense. Maybe that's helpful, maybe that's not. God, it's so hard to be an adult, right? To like hold discomfort and hope at the same time, or contradiction. Art does it so beautifully, but to do it as a growing person is just like, ugh, the worst.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us, first of all. I have a question about your work that's up at the Fry right now. I'm really interested in like the process of getting like how your work interacts with like the Fry collection. There's like the most like stepping into the room. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's like the Fry has
let's see if I can.
This collection of, I don't know, they're like historical paintings, it's like from, like, I don't know how to describe it without
They're like
sounding weird about it, but
and by weird you mean judgy?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's like yeah, I don't know. It's like yeah, you could see there like those kinds of paintings, like the kinds of stuff you would see at like a big city art museum in like the American painting section,
yes,
like the historical painting section, that kind of thing, like really lovely work, but it's like they're all like together like a parlor wall, and it's so striking, and it's like, and like the way your work interacts with it, and also like you have the video work in the other room with the green screen of like a picture of the wall or some of the paintings themselves.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like how did that happen? Like, how did you get them to get all this stuff out and like, like put it in a parlor wall? Because it's like really fantastic and like it's like silly and fun and joyful and I really loved it.
But and this is like one of those things. So the Fry Salon is always there. The Fry's permanent collection is these largely German paintings. Charles and Emma Fry moved to Seattle from Germany. They were very big collectors of these. I don't even know what I've got different problems, right? So these are not my problems, these paintings, but they are the collection of like these works that this couple picked out. They really love these paintings. They lived with these paintings, and then and people in that community. So the Fry Museum is a free museum on First Hill. First Hill is where we call it Pill Hill because that's where all the hospitals are and the retirement homes. So a lot of people really love this collection because they can look at the kind of deft painting skills of like all of these Germanic painters. And it is weird, right? It's weird. It's a weird collection. It's largely romantic. But this is like that contingency of like the place and people. I made the show for the people who know the collection, right? Like that's the audience that I'm thinking of because they're the ones that have the most hostility to contemporary art. And I know this is a fact because they really love what they love. And they do not love anything that is not that. So in my mind, I'm like, I don't know, like, like putting on my diplomatic hat of contemporary art, like I'm the welcome wagon to contemporary art and being like, can I figure out a hospitable way to deftly love this collection and also love it because it is the work of artists who are taking pigment and oil and their time and energy and canvas and observing and recording, right? Which is why I think I love painting, but this is simply, in my mind, a collection of subjective points of view and like a magical manipulation of material to record like sensation, images, portraits, whatever, right? And that's what I do too, right? I'm just doing it within this different economy and also from, a different kind of ethos. So to introduce myself as I say it's like the Jerry Lewis, right? Like I'm the prankster, to understand myself as a kind of fool, and to understand these works as not having the same set of values because they don't have the same notion of value through finish, through representation, that there's this way that they are similar and that they are really different. So my thinking was that I wanted them to cut a hole in the wall where my exhibition was. So you can see here, there's like a TV where the green screen is like as though you're looking through to the other side, as though you're in a window, and then there's an actual window. So the idea is like the TV is a portrait painting, right? And then this window is a portrait window. My thinking about painting has often been that it's like, it is not real like a TV. It is a window, right? And you can change your window, you can move your windows around the room, but it is this kind of proposition, right? Rectilinear proposition for something. And in this case, because I'm so interested in theater, I thought in creating this window, not only would it give my exhibition like a sense of like not being claustrophobic, like there's a window in it, like a home. It also created this idea of inviting the people that were moving inside of that main gallery as like actors, or that they became the kind of painting in a way. So it's hard. I didn't bring any photos of it, but there's this recursive relationship then between the home and then the interior in this part of the exhibition, and then in the taller ceiling, grander salon where all of this German artwork lives, is this different scale, this different economy, this wealthy person's notion of home that then I'm trying to take things like seating, a hat rack, like a key holder, and inserting that reality, puncturing the membrane of kind of like the exclusivity and the wealth of that salon, which was really just like a look at how much money I have thing, right? I'm puncturing that by offering things like, oh, this is where you could like put your coupons, right? Remember coupons, guys? Like, we know what that is, right? Or like a vase or this rug. So something to kind of like, in a very sneaky way, kind of poke, but also a kind of hospitable poke, right? Like a kind of generous, but also tongue-in-cheek, diplomatic something. And the videos too are just like me like goofing around, kind of making fun of like femme sculptural like poses or postures, or trying to get my kid to stop picking his nose while we're in the museum as a dance. Anyone else? You've been so lovely.
Yeah, I think I had less of a question and more of like a related thought to some things you had talked about, like a little bit before, after Wyatt's question. So sending back to like, yeah, you had mentioned the Virginia Woolf like solid objects thing of like some rocks are better than others, and then I don't know. You kept talking, and I wrote instinctual, charm, pathetic, in really good shape, and it reminded me of this time when I was a nanny, and there were these two boys that I was babysitting, and I like had cooked them a snack or something, and it was just like a chopped up piece of sausage, and one of the kids started crying, and I was like, "What's wrong, dude? Like, what's up?" And he's like, "My brother's sausages are just a way better shape than mine, and I want those ones." Like, and I was like, I understand. I was like, I know. It's like, okay. And then his brother was like, "You can have my sausages, you know?" It's like, it's okay. And it's like, I don't know, something in that was just so powerful to me. And I think about it in terms of art a lot. And it's like, that kid knew, what a good sausage shape is for him. That like, he's aware and he's got that. And, I don't know. I think that there's something, it's like, that is pathetic. It's like, why are you crying over the shape of your sausages that you're eating? It's like, but you're passionate about that, and there's something in you that knows, and it is that instinctual, like, I don't know, impulsive thing. And there's something pathetic about passion, and there's something, I don't know.
It's embarrassing, like, what you like is embarrassing.
And what you care.
And what you care about is so...
Yeah.
How unsophisticated.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's kind of like a half-cooked thought, but I was just thinking about, I don't know, that, like, you had kept talking after that about, like, a sense of relating or, like, kinship or not being alone, and it's like, I don't know, I was just like, I so resonated with this, like, distraught child, and... something about, I don't know, you had mentioned with, I don't remember the name of your piece, but the one that you thought the purple one was better, like all these configurations, and it's like, the audience doesn't know, the audience doesn't know what a good sausage shape is to you, I'm not like, but I don't know, I guess I just wanted to say that and hear your thoughts on it.
It's the same thing. I'm going to bring back our washing machine cover, right? Like, that's somebody's sausage shape. They were like, finally on Amazon, I finally found the solution to all of my problems, which is like, how do I make this unsightly machine into a princess. Right? And it's like, what a slight invitation to thinking about how we can disarm like the terror or overwhelm with our own taxonomy of pleasure, And when we think really philosophically and deeply about it, then it's like the dumb is never that dumb, right? It's just clear. And we're not used to like a clarity of like, yes. My siblings and I would fight over this yellow Tupperware cup. And from this vantage point, I'm like, yeah, because it was the lightest of the hues. Everything else was like tan and brown. They were disgusting. Like yellow is regal, and like who wouldn't want that cup? But it is like a very visceral thing of value. That is, the thing I love is that we're all different, right? Like, did you guys know that people are different? That they can have different points of view about what they like, and that people's points of view that are different than mine make me think more deeply about why I like what I like, or it deepens my capacity for the love of another person and getting excited about what they love too. And it's so cheap, right? Like, this is just stuff that's around us. It's the stuff that we're around us. And, we're lucky. We're so lucky to have stuff. But I really did think a lot after, there's so much right now where stuff is going. It's being burnt up or lost. And the pleasure is actually knowing that it's in here, that I don't even need this stuff. I can be like, ooh, oh, what a cheap date, right? What a luxury to get so much pleasure out of connecting and looking and feeling and relating. How powerful, really. Even if sometimes I don't have language for it. I wish I was so smart to be so succinct. Okay.
So one of your major things you care about in your art is contingency.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about how I'm bipolar and have manic episodes. I have experiences where contingency can feel like a strange sort of necessity, like synchronicity.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or experiences with that and the way you play with contingency, that you have the experience of almost like contingency almost feels like necessity in these sort of synchronistic, interesting ways.
Yes. Sometimes it's like, do I really like contingency that much? Or is it just the thing that is constantly forced upon me that I am saying yes to, right? And I think it's interesting to think about when my intentions become clearer, the synchronicity of things tends to get more acute, like things tend to fall into place in the way that they're supposed to. But I don't know what that is about. But I think it has something to do with love and intention, But I do think that it's part of that power of consenting to life, which is consenting to loss, consenting to disappointment, consenting to not having my way, or to have things completely melt down in front of me. And that rather than thinking about them as loss and being sad, but also being what's going to happen next, right? We presume goodwill, that those things can open up into new opportunities or threshold for goodwill. But this sometimes is maybe just a survival act as well. I have to think that. Thank you. Thank you.